master inventor from the IBM Watson Group, and he's going to tell us about cognitive computing, making a difference with development challenges. Can we have Neil on stage, please? Over to Neil.
Thank you. Good morning. How's everybody doing? Oh, that doesn't sound so good. I thought the morning exercise helped everybody out. Well, hopefully I'll pump you up as I go through my talk here. But first I want to just thank the conference organizers for inviting me to come speak out. So my name is Neil. I'm with IBM, the Watson Group. And I'm going to talk a little bit about cognitive computing. But to kind of set the stage for you guys a bit, my real goal with this talk is to get you to think. Right? You probably heard a lot the last few days, just in general, about artificial intelligence, machine learning, all these cool things, and data-driven decision making. But at the end of the day, how do you actually use that? And that's the main stumbling block that I've seen with a lot of organizations. We're talking about technology that works in a much different way than we're used to, right? We call this the third generation of computing, and it's not like our traditional programmable, executable type of applications. The way we work with artificial intelligence is different. It requires a different mode of thinking, but if we can do that, we can unlock a lot more value. And so hopefully, I'll help you figure out how to do that, and inspire you for some new ideas. So with that, I want to wind the clock back about 50 years ago. So if any of you are Star Trek fans, you remember that they used to be able to actually talk to the computer, right? They'd say, hey, what's wrong with the engines, or can you fix the engines, and the computer would do that. Well, we've transformed from our imagination to innovation where we can actually now do this today. We can actually have a conversation with a machine, right? We have robots that act as concierges. They can sing, they can dance. There's a lot of things we can do suddenly. The question is, how do we make the most value out of it? So let me start by talking a little bit, first of all, what is cognitive computing, right? What is this whole concept? And it's really trying to have a machine mimic human thinking. So leveraging its experiences, its memories, its body of knowledge. So I think there's three things to keep in mind when it comes to cognitive computing. First is this ability to learn and build knowledge. So the machine learning aspect. That as a machine does something, it actually gets better at it. So you might have heard about the 10,000 hour rule for people, that to master a subject or a domain, it takes about 10,000 hours. Computers can now do the same thing, except they don't need 10,000 hours. They can do it a lot faster. Second is the ability to actually process natural language. And this is something we take for granted as human beings. Right? If I said, hey, I'm feeling blue because it's raining cats and dogs, most of you probably know what I'm trying to say, right? But for a machine, it's going to try and break that down and say, wait a second, Neil is now the color blue because animals are falling from the sky? That does not compute. So the ability for machines to now break down what we're saying, understand slang, idiom, jargon, to look at a sentence contextually, grammatically, is a huge, huge move forward, especially in terms of how we can use it. Because we're now shifting away from requirements and moving towards interaction. And that's going to drive how we do all our future like software development and work in the cognitive computing or AI or machine learning space, whatever you want to think about. And the third is this interactive, right? We no longer have to worry about do I have the right keywords, do I have the right search terms, going through things. We can actually now have a conversation with a machine that actually is a subject matter expert. So think for a second, if you want to buy a bicycle, what would you do today? Right? You probably go to Google, type in thing about bicycle, read through several web pages, maybe you go to Facebook, look at some fan pages, you talk to some people, maybe you visit a store, you look at some bikes, you go through all this thing and you finally make a decision. Well, today, you could use cognitive computing if it's knows about bicycles, you could say, hey, what kind of bicycle should I buy? And then probably come back and say, well, why do you want a bicycle? Well, I want to get back in shape. Okay, how long do you plan to ride it? Or how often do you plan to ride it? About 3 times a week. All right, here's the right bicycle for you. I'm not just taking what we know from the conversation, but what the machine knows about me personally, my lifestyle, family style, all these types of things to come up with that type of recommendation. So basically the bottom line is we're at a precipice. We have a chance to really transform how we do everything today, right? If you think about the iPhone, it turns 10 years old this year. Actually, I think next month. Think about how much that's changed our lives professionally and personally, right? We're given rise to this whole app economy. Things like Uber couldn't exist without that. We're at the same type of edge right now with cognitive computing, where we can actually transform everything that we do in ways I think we can't even start to imagine yet. And that's the challenge that we have. How do we think about that, and how can we do that? So you guys are probably familiar with the more common forms of digital assistants, things like Siri, Cortana, Amazon, Alexa, right? And at the start, these were really just, search engines pumped up, augmented on steroids, right? But with the development in machine learning, they've gotten a lot smarter, and their ability to remember what they've done, learn more about you and how to interact with you, they've become smarter. So what can we actually do with these things then? Well, we're shifting away from trying to figure out what the right answer is to what's the best answer for a particular situation, right? The bicycle that might be right for me may not be right for you. And machines are now smart enough to recognize that and figure out, the different context and the different needs of each of us. So we now have literally thousands of companies that have put out products powered by some sort of cognitive computing or AI. They've partnered with people like IBM, Microsoft, Google, even Facebook to do these things. And I just want to share a couple of examples with you to kind of get the juices flowing about what could you do. And one of the first things we actually did with IBM Watson was go into healthcare. And we taught Watson about medicine, biology, chemistry, and we set Watson to work in cancer research. And here's the value, right? We're now at a point with technology where machines can answer questions that we don't know the answer to, right? They can come up with original insights and actually help us figure out things. So Watson actually develops target proteins in the fight against cancer. Watson actually developed, I think, 3 new proteins in about 5 weeks. The researchers that Watson was working with said it probably would have taken them about 3 years to do the same thing, right? We also have cooking. What does the machine know about cooking? It doesn't eat, doesn't know taste. But again, it knows chemistry. We taught Watson about the flavors that people like. We taught Watson about healthy food and nutrition. And so now it's unlocked whole new ingredient combinations we never thought of before. We can take this one step further and say, well, you think about the traditional programs out there, childhood obesity, can we now combat that using the knowledge that Watson has? And we absolutely can. Right? There's a partner out there that's decided they could use cognitive computing to actually train seeing eye dogs. We have machines training dogs. Right? There's a lot of work in education where groups like Sesame Street are now using cognitive computing to personalize education for each student based on their own strengths and weaknesses so they can actually learn more at their own pace. You got things in IoT and smart homes, energy usage. But one of the things I really want to share with you is that we have machines that don't understand human emotion. Think about that for a second. Can machines create art? Can they do these things? We had Watson watch a movie, and based on the target audience, it looked at the movie and it analyzed it for the emotionality of each scene, plucked out what it thought was the most pertinent scenes, reordered them to create a movie trailer to entice those people to watch the movie based on emotion. Right? We can now extrapolate that, and people are now using that same thing for like behavioral health. If someone's feeling depressed or suicidal, you have a machine that can now alter the way it interacts, talks, even the words it uses to engage that person. Hopefully you're looking at this and saying, okay, these are some interesting examples, but I don't know how this really helps me, right? There's something missing here. What could that be? There doesn't seem to be a lot of use yet in the sustainable development space, right? And this is something that we recognize and we're trying to help people pioneer. And one of the things that IBM has done is actually partnered with a lot of NGOs and government organizations on something called Project Lucy, where we're trying to enhance the infrastructure in Africa using something like a Watson, cognitive computing, to make things better. And it spans the gambit. There's initiatives going on in agriculture to make improve crop yield for farmers, to decrease the use of water needed for that. There's about 2,000 people per doctor in Africa. So now we're using Watson to help in healthcare, where you have a self-contained tablet, and there's a medical emergency in a village. A villager can use that tablet to help diagnose and actually treat the patient with Watson's help. We're using it in education, recognizing that if we want to help people, advance, reduce income inequality, and get the skills they're going to need for the jobs tomorrow, we got to enable them with the way to actually do that. So it really spans the gambit, and this is a 10-year initiative that IBM has actually committed a $100 million investment to. The good thing is it can actually expand out beyond Africa, but this is just a starting point. So my call to action for you guys is, how do you do this? Forget about people, forget about process, forget about technology. Ask yourself, what's the problem? What's that pain point you're trying to solve, or what's that one thing you always wished you could do? Can you do it, right? Think about what's the solution first, and then can you ask yourself, could something like cognitive computing help me do that, right? My job is to actually help people figure that stuff out, and I've given away tons of ideas, mainly in the commercial space, unfortunately. But my hope actually is to have a brainstorming assistant one day to actually help me do this. So my challenge to you guys is, what are you going to do with cognitive computing? What's that problem you want to solve? Take a few minutes, think about it. Think about, again, in an ideal world, how you would try and solve it. And ask yourself, how could I use cognitive computing to make that a reality? Thank you.
That was a wonderful talk. Thank you, Neil. I'd now like to call upon our next speaker, Deepak Basu, Chief Executive Officer, Anudeep Foundation. He's going to talk about 3D printing for development. Can we have Deepak Basu on stage, please?
Notice I brought a shopping bag. Something for you. Good morning and welcome to Hyderabad. I'm really glad Dr. Chakravarti and Prashant Shukla brought the concept of a journey to this conference. It's mainly been dominated by big data and data security, data privacy. I am going to talk about a journey which I invite you to take with me into a field which is very driven from the heart and very driven from technology, and which could, we believe, become a game changer in the development sector. So my name is Deepak. I am the founder and current CEO of Anudeep Foundation. We'll talk about Anudeep for just a second and move on to the project that I want to talk about, 3D printing for development. So Anudeep, the details, we have a booth, you can visit us. But fundamentally, we are a livelihoods organization, and over the last 10 years, we've been very involved with young people, young rural people, very bright, very creative, very talented, but who lack access to professional livelihoods, coming from farming, fishing, labor backgrounds. And so what we've done is taken 70,000 odd young men and women and provided them livelihoods, which is jobs or startup businesses in IT-enabled services, essentially digital livelihoods, and we are growing around the country. So it's given us a lot of contacts and a lot of presence in rural India, and we are moving forward from that into this program called 3D printing for development. So there might be some who are not completely aware of 3D printing. 2 years ago, I didn't know what 3D printing was, but essentially you design something. It could be a little ball, it could be the world, and make a printer print it for you. So it's the most common ones are driven by plastic filaments, and the intellectual property is in the design, the intelligence is in the design part of it. The printer is just a tool, although sometimes the printer tends to dominate conversations. And it's now fairly common in the West, but not very heavily used in India and other developing countries. So that's 3D printing. The technology of 3D printing has had huge implications in today's world. If you flew into Hyderabad on Qatar Airways, or if you're flying out on Qatar Airways, you'll note that there are 1,000 plus parts in that plane which are 3D printed. And the 3D printing is very useful for complex products which are not mass produced. Now, I don't think Airbus makes thousands and thousands of A350s, but they make a few which require very specific parts, and you can read about the attributes of those parts. And this is avionics or aviation, where 3D printing is getting a lot of focus. And then there is medicine, another huge application area for 3D printing, especially facial surgery or maxillary reconstruction, and where victims of accidents can have their face modeled or their face skeleton modeled from their pictures of their prior life, and then the reconstructive surgery can give them the same look back. And it goes on to other types of medical applications, which are really, really interesting. This is fun. This is a project for NASA. Well, food. Food is made through 3D printers, chocolates, you name it. But in this particular case, the components of that, what is it, pepperoni pizza, are kept in powders which are made into mush and then fed into this printer, and out comes a pizza. And this is actually being planned for a manned space mission to Mars, which will take 5 years or so, and pizza would get stale if it was kept frozen. And you can think about it, and you can, if you really do this, take our wonderful Hyderabadi biryani and make it come out in the form of a pizza. That should be fun. Which leads me to say this is 3D printing really unleashes people's creativity, and that's really why we are coming to the 3D printing for development aspect of things. The other huge aspect of 3D printing is getting affordable. Yesterday on Amazon, there was this printer made by a company called XYZ Printing. Sounds an unusual name, but it's got the name Da Vinci. And it's a good printer. 2 years ago, or maybe a little more, I brought from the US in my checked luggage to India a kit, which was my first 3D printer, and that cost $350. And now this is a fully assembled, very good printer for $199. It's really competing with regular printers now. So what are we doing about 3D printing and development? And here's where the journey begins. And I'd like to take you through it. And it began at Santa Clara University in California, where some of you may have met Radha. She was in charge of the Frugal Innovation Labs. And she took me there and said, come and look at some of the work we're doing. And we went to this maker lab at Santa Clara University, where I very gingerly put on safety glasses and put on a lab coat and gloves and went and touched my first 3D printer. And then there was a project there on 3D printing for development, and we moved from there to an idea. This is a very early slide in our thinking about how to use 3D printing for development to take this ocean of plastic waste, which you'll see dotting our villages and the towns for that matter, and try to convert them into something useful that could be used by people of those areas where the plastic waste accumulates, and thereby having a very strong social impact on people, both from useful items as well as removing plastic waste. So the concept here is that the plastic would be recycled into filaments. Filaments would be fed into 3D printers and things designed like glasses, spectacles, and hands and other things. Teeth could be generated. So we began there and began to research the field. And the next thing we did was actually ask people, okay, we are going to use it for rural applications. So we went and took a 3D printer into a focal group of garment workers. This was a Microsoft-funded project for developing cooperatives for garment farmers. Had a few other local businessmen, jewelers there, and their eyes just went big. And they couldn't think of 3D printing. And so we got this printer in front of them, fired it up, and we were making something which took maybe 15, 20 minutes. It takes time to print things. And the bulb went off when this little girl, we took these two halves and put it together, and she had an egg in her hand, and she could relate to an egg and say, oh my God, this was made for me. And we saw this girl who's probably going to grow into an Anudeep student, and here she was talking. Then she started to talk, ask questions, and began to try to understand how this was possible, that out of nothing, something could come. Okay. So that got us going, and we came up with this nice acronym called 3D4D. Sounded very futuristic, but it has deeply rooted in development. And we said, let's try to do something with 3D printing. And through grants initially from eBay, then from Microsoft, and now with Cisco, we put a team together. Oh, there it is. And this team is our core 3D4D team, who are our students. They come from very marginalized backgrounds, mostly rural backgrounds, and they are high school students. And here we said we are going to try to make things using 3D printers. The 7-member team we selected were, yes, the graduates from our training institutions. They had taken some advanced courses in graphic design or on hardware maintenance, and we selected them and realized that a huge amount of training is required to get them geometry. I learned a fair bit of high school geometry with them, then engineering drawing, maintenance of these, the temperatures and the motions of these printers. All of that took some time. Luckily, we had a good trainer. And then we decided on, then we had decided by then to work on prosthetics, because that was an area that this woman, Claire, who was a Fulbright scholar, took us over that threshold to actually find and touch real patients. Here we were, geeks with playing with machines, and we wanted to help real people. And this is a medical aspect of it, none of us were. So this boy in the middle, his name is Shawaz, he was born without a right arm. It's a genetic disorder. And he's got his first arm strapped on. And there we were really excited because we had actually done something useful. She brought that arm from a design from the Enable the Community Foundation. So there's Shawaz. He's a school kid. And then we worked with this girl. She lost her arm in a train accident, and she is about to get married, and she's making tea and cutting vegetables at home. Then I'll run a short video for you. It's a 1-minute video. Can we run the video? About a grocery vegetable seller and sports enthusiast. So he has to carry vegetables on a bicycle.
আপনি যা যা কাজ করতে কি কাজ করতে পারবেন মানে যেগুলো চাইছেন সেগুলো করতে পারবেন
আমার তো কিছুটা পারবো দেখে মনে হচ্ছে তো এখন তো প্র্যাকটিস করতে পারি কথা সেকেন্ড টেস্টিং হবে
Okay, we can turn it off. So as I'm running out of time, I'm going to move forward quickly. We have now several versions of the hand. We've actually designed specific hands for grocers, truck drivers, students, and so forth, factory workers. And one of the things people don't like to be seen are these bionic-looking arms, which you see in these pictures, and we've developed a glove that goes over it so that it's unobtrusive. They can take it off when they don't need it. Where are we going with this? We'll continue to work with people with disabilities. 23,000 new people with amputations come into India each year. 3D printing is very useful for kids because they grow, and these are very flexible designs which can grow with them. They're inexpensive. Working with police and army people who've been injured. And this is just in India. We can extend it to victims of minefields and so on. And you heard about the Jaipur foot. We are working with something called the Osaka hand, which uses sensors and to use it. And again, the frugal engineering would have to be applied to make it affordable. But the vision really is that there'll be groups of people in rural areas, just like the call centers when phones were hard to come by. There will be a 3D printer in every village or every area where you can go and get things done, like broken phones, broken fans, parts for irrigation pumps, and so on. But the real impact of 3D printing is creativity. We hope to work with many schools and work with the government. And this is where the future of 3D printing for development is. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepak. Thank you for a wonderful and inspiring talk. Our next session is a panel. It'll talk about the role of impact investing in scaling for SDGs. I would now like to call upon the moderator for this panel, Radha Basu, Chief Technology Officer, iMerit Technology Services Private Limited. Radha.